Hey everyone, this time we read Spelunky by Derek Yu. Spelunky is a roguelike game which was released in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's kind of got a pretty cool story and I just really liked reading this one a lot. This is one of those boss fight books that just it brings something different to the table. Each one is different, each one, gives you a different story. Some of them I've liked more than others. This is one that I really enjoyed because it talks a lot more about the development of games, as opposed to talking about their history or the stories of them. This is more about the story of the game's development and a lot of the choices that went into the game. It's really, really good. So around the time of Spelunky's release, that's when consoles kind of became a viable option for indie games. It was pretty cool to see a lot of the cheaper games, well, not cheaper by terms of them being made, but cheaper as far as price tags go, being released on consoles. You had those before, but it usually wasn't anything special. It was usually like a $20 title or 30 or something like that. Now you could get a game for like 10 or something, cheaper than that. And it just kind of opened the door for a lot of indie creators at the time. But this really isn't the story of Spelunky the game. At least it wasn't for me. The parts that I found way more interesting were Derek talking about like his story in developing the game, the choices behind a lot of the different parts of the game, how he kind of tweaked things, his struggle with porting this game over to the Xbox. It was just it was just really cool to read that stuff as opposed to just here's the history of the game, here's a walkthrough, that sort of thing. Those are fun to read, but something like this where the creator's actually explaining this is why I'm doing this is why this happened. Here's kind of the basic functions behind why these events happen in the game. It's just really cool to read that sort of thing, and it's pretty different from a lot of the other books that I've read. I like his definition. It works pretty well for me. Roguelikes were always kind of one of those weird genres that I never really understood too well. Mostly because they cross over a lot with action RPGs and that sort of thing. Usually with a roguelike, you've got randomly generated levels, you have, like, you'll die a lot, like a lot in those games. They'll usually be really hard, but not impossible. They normally give you all the tools that you need to succeed, and it's really up to, like, the skill of the player in order to get through them. He then moves into the history of his own game development and that sort of thing. And it's kind of interesting to read about that, hearing the different examples of what inspired him and some of the things that he kind of grabbed from other games and put into Spelunky. One of the parts that I found really interesting was his talk about Link's Awakening. Uh, Legend of Zelda was a pretty big inspiration for him, as well as the Castlevania games. But when he talks about Link's Awakening and he talks about kind of the repercussions for stealing something in the game and how he wanted to incorporate that in Spelunky, that was something that I thought was really cool. To go on a little side note on that, in Link's Awakening, when you would steal something from the merchant, you would be fine for a while until you tried to go back in and buy something else. When you walked back into his shop, he would be standing up at the top. He'd say, you stole something from me, like that's basically like that's not cool, and then he'd kill you. And you'd start over, and from the rest of the game, you would get called thief by everyone. It was just kind of a cool way to say, yeah, you can steal something, but now you're not going to be called with your name throughout the rest of this. It it was just something really fun, and he kind of took the idea for that and put it into Spelunky, where all the merchants are equipped with shotguns. So if you steal something, they go crazy and they try to murder you with their shotguns. It's kind of fun. There's also a section on Derek taking in the feedback that he gets. And I like the way he sort of explains how this feedback gets dissected, especially when it's just it just sounds like an overwhelmingly negative feedback, where this guy is telling him this game sucks because it's too hard, and Derek's kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, he's having problems with it. Does that mean I need to change everything overall, or is it just he's not progressing at the level that I would expect from a player, that sort of thing? And he's explaining, like, well, just because it's one person, I don't necessarily need to change the design, but maybe I should kind of look at certain things and try to find ways to help the player out a little bit. That was a pretty interesting conversation, because you took something that was on the surface not very helpful, just one person giving their experience of, I think your game sucks because it's too hard, and he sort of goes through some steps on, like, well, why is it so hard for this person? Why are they having problems with it where other people are kind of doing it, are not having the same issues that he is? It's kind of a fun thing to read about and just listen, and not really listen, but watch him go through the steps of sort of incorporating that feedback and try to turn it into a positive. And finally, we hear a lot of Derek's ideas on level design and just what he does in order to make the game fun. And that's that's one of the things that I keep coming back to whenever I read a book that's about games development or about developers in general, is they always talk about how to design fun in their game, how to make the game fun, essentially. And it's cool to read about this stuff, not from like a journalist or from someone else who's just trying to convey what the programmer and the developers are saying, but to actually hear the developer talk about it. It was pretty cool to read that stuff, and it's one of the things that I really enjoyed with this book. So anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody.